Hello and thank you for joining us. I'm Cody Proctor. This is the KREM 2 News Week in Review, where each weekend we bring you headlines from the past week in the Inland Northwest. Let's get started with one of the biggest news stories of the past few days.
I have a date here, November of 1983, when I left, with my dad. So he came all the way to the point, this is the time I said goodbye to him.
Manucher Gabareche tells me he was just 19 years old when he left his home country of Iran. He says after watching a fanatic regime take over a once modern country, he could not accept what was happening.
If I stay in Iran, I would end up, either going to jail or, being hanged.
So he fled to Turkey on foot before arriving in the United States 2 years later in 1985. He and his wife later settled in Spokane in 2004, and he says they've loved calling it home ever since. Now a successful construction entrepreneur and WSU grad, he still has loved ones in the Middle East. When news of airstrikes in Iran broke, he says he's just taking it one day at a time.
Any war, doesn't have a winner. Is everyone, lose. I support, this administration with standing with Iranian people, but how do we again, execute?
Manucher describes he is unsure how a possible war would benefit the everyday American.
How we skin this cat, we could have done it, in a fashion that it doesn't, impact, American lives, whereas, it would, just basically be on, Iranian people, because freedom has a cost.
He says he wants to see positive change for Iranian leadership, but he does not support more U.S. involvement.
If I was advising President Trump, I would say, let Iranian, deal with, Ayatollahs.
People all across the Inland Northwest are telling me the same thing today, that they're shocked at the price of the pump, even compared to just a week ago.
As the conflict in Iran continues to escalate, fuel experts warn that with the closure of vital waterways, it will be challenging to move things like oil to the global customers and nations that need it most, meaning the price at the pump will rise throughout the United States. People across the Inland Northwest I talked to say they are definitely feeling the pinch, even in places where gas is cheaper, like Idaho.
It's over $4 a gallon right now in Washington. It's starting to come over here too, because I got gas last month. It was $2.68, I think I paid. Is about $110 to fill my truck up, and right now we're at $150. So it's gone up to $3.25 here compared to that last month.
And while most people are frustrated with the price at the pump, some customers I spoke to say they are glad something is being done in the Middle East, regardless if it affects their wallets.
It's a low price to pay now to have a better life. Iran scares us, I think scares me, and what they're capable of doing. So yeah, I'm glad it's getting taken care of.
Experts say at this point, the uncertainty of what could be attacked in places like the Strait of Hormuz is causing things like insurance rates to increase, which then forces these oil vessels that carry anywhere from 2 to 4 million barrels of oil to park. Now, oil has increased to $10 a barrel over the weekend, which is why people are paying more today. Experts say at this point, there is no telling how long these higher prices will stick around. They say despite the national average spike of 15 cents, as we get to spring, we will start to see these gas prices increase regardless. In Spokane, Christian Garza, KREM 2 News.
Well, today, Executive Director of Thrive International, Mark Finney, says in a time like this, it's important for Thrive to build bridges between communities in Spokane that have historically been in conflict with one another. Since 2022, Thrive International officials tell me the organization has helped newly arrived immigrants settle and become community members of Spokane. As national headlines continue to emerge from Iran and the Middle East, Thrive's executive director says he expects local immigrants and refugees may lose contact with loved ones overseas, experience heightened anxiety, and also some may fear being ostracized by other community members here in Spokane. But he emphasized one of Thrive's roles is to smooth any tensions or anxiety people may be feeling.
Part of Thrive's work is to try and help build those bridges and heal those wounds so that in becoming Americans, we can bring the best of what we brought with us from overseas, but also try to lay down some of that historical animosity and build a better community.
Finney also noted that compared to other groups resettling in Spokane, including refugees from Ukraine and Russia, the city has not seen large waves of Iranian refugees, but rather a steady, slower arrival over time. Now, today I reached out to several organizations to see if any refugee community members wanted to personally share their thoughts on the events unfolding in the Middle East. At this time, all declined to comment. For now, I am reporting in studio. Regan Gallo, KREM 2 News.
As we go to break, here's a check of your weekend forecast. Welcome back to the KREM 2 News Week in Review. It has been a busy week all across the inland Northwest, so let's catch you up on some of the news you might have missed.
If you're a private property owner in Spokane, this new ordinance says you can't lease your property out as a detention facility. And what many of you asked is this even legal?
The proposed emergency ordinance would block private property owners in Spokane from leasing space for detention facilities in residential, commercial, or industrial zones.
I've yet to ever get a call from somebody that wants to open up a detention center.
Eric Stephen is a landlord and tenant attorney in Spokane. He says the city has the power to implement this kind of restriction. That is, until a court decides it's gone too far.
They have the legal authority to pass the ordinance until somebody sues them and requires it to be overturned.
He says it could be challenged as a potential taking, which is a term meaning if a regulation goes too far in limiting property rights, property owners could have legal recourse.
It's somehow restricting the ability to use property to its maximum potential use.
I sat down with Councilmember Paul Dillon, who is sponsoring the ordinance. He believes the city is on solid legal footing because the ordinance focuses strictly on zoning.
What do you say to private property owners who believe that this ordinance is an overstep by the government, regardless of political belief or stance on ICE enforcement?
Yeah. I mean, I would argue that a lot of the overstep that we're seeing is violating people's due process. It's violating the Fourth Amendment of the United States Constitution.
If somebody wanted to lease their private property, say it's either industrial or even residential, and rent it out as a detention facility, what would you tell them? I mean, are you effectively telling property owners what they can't do with their private property?
That's right. Yeah, they can't. And they shouldn't.
Washington already bans some private immigration detention centers, but Dillon says that law left a loophole. He says this ordinance blocks detention as a land use citywide. Now, in 2022, the Ninth Circuit Court said states can't block federal facilities under the Supremacy Clause. Dillon says this is different because it focuses on local zoning, not the federal government. You can watch the full interview with Councilmember Dillon right now on KREM 2+. Amanda Rowley, KREM 2 News.
Yeah, one policy creates a citywide immigration enforcement-free zone or zones, while another bans private property owners from leasing space for detention facilities in residential, commercial, or industrial zones. The first policy council voted on tonight was an ordinance titled Immigration Enforcement-Free Zones. It passed with a 6-1 vote. Councilmember Cathcart voted against it. The ordinance ensures city-owned property, including city buildings and facilities, may not be voluntarily used to support federal immigration enforcement activities without a judicial warrant. Supporters say the change is designed to promote safety and trust in the community for anyone of any immigration status, while opponents argued it adds more tension against federal agents, saying it won't solve anything.
This ordinance helps keeps our people safe in public spaces and helps Spokane residents understand what their rights are.
And so we have to start to look towards what we can do to maybe prevent this conflict, which is not draw attention to us on a national scale, which will probably draw the people here to show that they can do this.
City Council also passed the emergency ordinance that prevents private property owners from leasing spaces as detention facilities. Supporters say it's aimed to help the immigration community and make sure people get their due process. Opponents argue it puts the city at risk of a lawsuit if its enforcement goes too far. Because it's an emergency ordinance, it goes into effect immediately. Now, this ordinance also passed 6-1 with Councilmember Cathcart voting against it. Connor McAvoy, KREM 2 News.
Well, right behind me is East Adams Rural Healthcare in Ritzville, and it was this exact spot where I first reported about the hospital potentially closing. According to current leadership, the hospital's financial crisis stemmed from previous hospital administration reportedly concealing deficits, falsifying financial documents, and engaging in unauthorized spending. In all, they ended up being short $10.5 million with a debt of about $5 million. They managed to pull away from the brink of closure through cash infusions. East Adams Rural also filed to operate as the state's first rural emergency hospital, but that route would lead them to cutting some of their services, including primary care. According to the most recent data from the U.S. Census Bureau, Ritzville's elderly population makes up about 20% of the community, one that relies on health care. Caregiver and Ritzville City Council member Jessica Quinn says she's concerned about the impact closing primary care services to become an REH could have on her clients.
We need more from our hospital leadership now as it stands to do more to keep our primary care services open because our city can't survive without it.
While Quinn acknowledges the hospital's been dealt a tough hand, she believes it wouldn't take much to keep the services. I reached out to hospital administrators about the concerns. They said at this time, the closure of the primary care clinic is not final. Now, East Adams Rural Healthcare still has a long way to climb out of this situation. They still need to settle that $5 million in unsecured debt to avoid filing for bankruptcy. In Ritzville, Cody Proctor, KREM 2 News. Thanks for joining KREM 2 News this weekend. I'm Cody Proctor. Right now, we're taking a look back at some of the news stories from the past week in this edition of the KREM 2 News Week in Review.
KREM does not know the boundary of Spokane Valley. It does not know the boundary of the city of Spokane.
Strong words during Tuesday night's Spokane Valley City Council meeting on the topic of banning the sale of KREM. Spokane City Council President Betsy Wilkerson faced Valley Council members one day after she, alongside other Spokane city leaders, voted to ban the sale of the drug in their jurisdiction.
To me, this is a community safety issue, especially for our children.
KREM is a psychoactive drug made from the leaves of an evergreen tree native to Southeast Asia. The DEA reports at low doses it can act as a stimulant, and at high doses it can act as a sedative that can lead to psychotic symptoms. The drug, while legal, is not regulated under the FDA, and in fact, the agency advises folks avoid it because of its risks of addiction. The Panhandle Health District released a statement advising people avoid KREM products, saying it's addictive and has a risk of overdose. The ordinance Valley Council members voted on tonight makes it illegal to sell KREM. Violators would receive a Class 1 civil infraction and a $250 fine. Any business caught selling it could risk having its license revoked. It goes into effect 5 days after the mayor's signature and won't be enforced until 30 days have passed for businesses to be able to adapt to it. Councilmember Al Merkel raised concerns discussing the ban, arguing businesses across the valley will suffer as a result, and neighboring cities without a ban will only see more customers in their stores.
People are going to be able to drive less than 5 minutes, in any direction and still be able to acquire KREM.
Still, council members voted to ban the sale of KREM, saying the drug's risks don't outweigh any reward.
What's more important, the profit or the health and well-being of the children or even adults? I am very much in favor of just going forward and banning it now.
With the banning of KREM in the city of Spokane and Valley, Spokane Council President Wilkerson hopes both cities can work together to learn more about the drug and find other means of controlling it without an outright ban. But until then,
I don't have to wait for somebody to die to know what I don't know.
Connor McAvoy, KREM 2 News.
When we last checked in with Governor Bob Ferguson on this income tax, he said he had concerns, but he said he was also optimistic a deal could be reached. Today, he says he is less optimistic. He knows work still needs to be done, but the legislature is set to wrap up here 1 week from Thursday. Under the latest proposal, households earning more than $1 million would pay the tax, the first income tax in Washington state. It would be a 9.9% levy on earnings above $1 million. The sales tax would be eliminated for personal hygiene products and diapers, and there are tax breaks for small businesses and low-income families. But Governor Ferguson wants those tax breaks expanded.
My North Star, I've said publicly and privately, more money back in the pockets of hardworking Washingtonians. That is reality for me. For me to sign something, that's what I have to see.
The last time we had this discussion, you said you were optimistic that we could get there. I'm sensing...
Maybe a little less optimistic, yeah.
We'll have a whole list of things that members and the governor want us to consider in the bill. But even a millionaire's tax bill, which generates a lot of revenue, will not have the capacity to hold all the different things that people want.
Governor Bob Ferguson called this proposal big and complex, and he said it's possible legislators may not reach a deal by the end of what is considered a short session, a 60-day session here in Olympia. In Olympia, Drew Mickelson, King 5 News.
Welcome back. Before we wrap up this edition of the KREM 2 News Week in Review, we want to remind you that you can get the latest newscasts and weather forecasts anytime on KREM 2 Plus. It's free to watch and download for Roku, Amazon Fire, and on Apple TV. Now here's one more story before we go. WSU's Pullman campus spans over 1,600 acres, and tucked within the campus is something that makes it unique within Washington's university system. And it's going through a major expansion. The outside of the Dodgen Research Facility doesn't look like much, but inside is this, a nuclear reactor sitting on the edge of WSU's campus. A blue glow down in the depths of the pool is being generated by the reactor's core. This Saturday marks 65 years since the reactor became active in the middle of the atomic age.
At that time in the 1960s, the federal government was actually investing in nuclear science by installing reactors at universities across the country. WSU is one of the few universities that still maintains our reactor.
Here, students can get training to become licensed reactor operators and conduct experiments. Safety's also a big deal here. For example, the panel I'm stepping on is checking to make sure there's nothing radioactive on my hands. It takes a moment.
Okay, you're all set.
And we're in the clear. It's that safety culture that Nuclear Science Center Director Corey Hines says they pride themselves on.
Anybody can be corrected at any time for something that they see that could be unsafe, could be a near miss, could be an issue with our safety plan.
Right now, WSU's Nuclear Science Center is in the middle of building their new 5,000 square foot expansion. Once it's done, the $7.6 million project will be the home of 3 new hot cells, heavily shielded containment units made with thick carbon steel walls, which operators can use for experiments. WSU believes the expansion should help with the nuclear workforce shortage, especially since many within it are getting older. According to WSU's VP for Research, Kim Kristen, the U.S. government invested heavily in nuclear energy in the 60s, but it dropped off later in the 80s and 90s.
We have an aging workforce coupled with an investment strategy in the U.S. to quadruple our nuclear energy. And so, that's mismatched. We need to bring up the education to match that need.
WSU is trying to secure funding for the next phase, which could range between $23 to $43 million, depending on the building and assembly of the hot cells. Phase 1 of the hot cell expansion is expected to be done by August. After that, the Nuclear Science Center hopes to finish the entire project no later than 2029. In Pullman, Cody Proctor, KREM 2 News. Thank you for spending part of your weekend with us on the KREM 2 News Week in Review. Be sure to keep it here on KREM 2 for more news and weather updates. I'm Cody Proctor. Thanks for watching.